All right, I've been asked to do these 4 problems on your worksheet number 1. So I'm going to do this a little different. The first thing I noticed about this first problem number 4 here is this right here has 2 terms in it with a cotangent squared, which makes me think Pythagorean identities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from Pythagorean identities into cosecant squared x. Then what I'm going to do is then change that into sine, which is 1 over sine, but there's 2 of them because it's squared, so it's 1 over sine squared x. And then this one sine will reduce with one of these sines, so this is 1 times 1, which is 1, and 1 times sine, which is sine x. And then using my reciprocal again, because I don't want fractions, this whole thing will equal cosecant x. Same thing on the bottom here. This is a binomial with a square, makes me think Pythagorean identities. So the first thing I'm going to do is change this bottom into secant squared x, because that's what Pythagorean tells me. Then I'm going to change everything into sine and cosine. So tangent, and because it's squared, is sine squared over cosine squared x. And then secant squared is 1 over cosine squared x. And now I'm going to flip the bottom over and multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator to the top. And this cosine squared and that cosine squared reduced to 1. So sine squared times 1 is sine squared x, and it's 1 on the bottom, which changes nothing. So that's this problem. Now up here, I'm going to FOIL this top part. So I'm going to have 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times secant is secant. Negative cosine times 1 is negative cosine x. And then negative cosine times secant is negative cosine x secant x. And again, I'm doing these the fastest way possible because that's how I want to do them. So if I look at cosine secant, I know these 2 are reciprocals. So those 2 are going to give me 1. So this is 1 plus secant x minus cosine x minus 1 all over tan x. So this negative 1 and this 1, these are like terms and they cancel out. So they both go to 0. Now I'm going to change everything into terms of sine and cosine. So secant is 1 over cosine x. And I have, oops, not plus, but minus cosine x all over sine x over cosine x. So I'm going to take this fraction in the bottom, and I'm going to leave this fraction up here and these fractions in the top the same. We're going to flip it over and multiply by the reciprocal of the bottom, which will give me 1 over cosine x minus cosine x over 1. That was the top, and I'm going to flip the bottom over. And I'm going to get this. So I got to distribute this thing to both of these. So I take cosine times 1 is cosine. Sine times cosine is sine cosine. Cosine times negative cosine is negative cosine squared. Put this like this. And sine times 1 is sine x. I can tell right now I should have done something a little different, but that's okay. Now, you know what? I'm going to change this because I can see something that would have been better. Okay, let me go back up here and let me get a common denominator up in my top part. So I want to add those 2 fractions up here. I want these 2 fractions to add, which means I got to have a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this by cosine x over cosine x. And when I do, I've got 1 minus cosine squared x, because that times that's cosine squared. And then this is cosine and that's cosine, so your common denominator is cosine x. And I have this look. Now again, this thing in the top is a Pythagorean identity. This thing right here, 1 minus cosine squared, is a Pythagorean, and that is sine squared x. And now I have a fraction divided by a fraction, so I'm going to flip this bottom one upside down. I'm going to come over here and do it. So I got sine squared x over cosine x. I'm going to flip this one upside down, which is cosine x over sine x. So these cosines reduce to 1s. This sine squared will go to a 1 because it reduces with that one. So I'm going to end up with sine x times 1 is sine x over the 1 times 1 in the bottom, so this whole thing is sine x. Going to come up here and do this one. So I'm going to change this. I'm not going to change sign. I'll leave it the same. I'm going to make this 1 over cosine x, and I'm going to make this cosine x over sine x. Okay, so I am multiplying a bunch of fractions, so I can reduce that sign with that sign. They go to 1s. This cosine and this cosine, they go to 1. So on top, you got 1 times 1 times 1. On the bottom, 1 times 1 times 1. 1 over 1 is 1, and that's those problems.